Alright, so in this video I'm going to show you how to use the XRite Color Checker Passport video in Davinci Resolve to color calibrate your camera so that when you're shooting under similar lighting conditions you don't necessarily have to bring out the color checker again. You can create multiple white balance settings in your camera, such as a Panasonic GH5, and then simply set those white balances for the various situations, and then you can apply the LUT that you've created and you'll get a very good look to start with. And I'm not going to cover every little detail here, but I'm just going to give you a general overview of this procedure, and yes, you can apply it to any other camera as long as you understand the concept. So let's get into it. Alright, so here, I'm going to press Shift F here in Davinci Resolve, you can see, and then Shift Z would make it go full screen, or it'll fill the frame. You can see this is a Vlog-L footage shot on the Panasonic GH5. This is CinelikeD, which I'm going to match the Vlog to the CinelikeD and press Shift D to unbypass the nodes. You can see that they match decently well, not exactly in colors, but overall brightness and things like that. So I'll press Shift F to go back to the full screen software view here, and you can see I've got a note here, Vlog to CineLike, and I've created a little curve here, and I've was able to figure out what the log curve actually is, or approximate it. You can also go to editable splines and you can get some Bezier handles if you want more control, but I found this was adequate. So I'm going to press Control C to copy that node, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the timeline here. And I'm going to actually go to a different timeline, this one right here, because this is the one I want to demonstrate with. This clip right here, find in media pool. So this clip right here, I'm going to right click and find in media pool, and then I'm going to right click the clip and create a new timeline. I'm just going to call it test, and I'm going to make sure that of course it is in 3840. So it's a test timeline, nothing special. I'm going to get rid of the media pool, and now I'm going to press Shift Z to make the timeline go full screen there. So step one is I'm just going to get rid of this. I'm going to reset all grades and nodes. Now you can see that in this particular view here, what I'm doing is you can see I'm recording two color checkers. So there's one right here. I've already set my white balance to this white card, and then I record the color checker itself with the same, well, the exposure doesn't matter, but I am exposing it properly with the histogram. You could also use the waveform monitor on the GH5, but it's not that important here. But what I'm doing is I'm going to make a marker right here, so I'm going to select the clip and press M. Now I should have lowered my aperture quite a bit. I should have stopped it down and had these color swatches a bit more like in proper definition, but it's not a big deal. I'm going to go back over here as well. I'll press another M button, so M, to create another marker. Now you can see, notice the situation here that we're trying to correct for. Notice that I am trying to correct for looking through a windshield, which, as everyone knows, windshields have some sort of tint to them. Looking through a windshield on a cloudy day. And again, I'm in Vlog. So let's go ahead and go to the color tab. So I'm going to get rid of the clip so we can have a bit more space here. First, I'm going to press Alt S and create a new serial node, and I'll press Control V to paste our Vlog to CinelikeD curve in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to go to my markers. So we're going to go to white balance first. So here's the white balance one. I'll press Alt S to add a new serial node. I'm going to go to the masking tab and just create a simple mask here. And if I go to my vector scope, which if I bring it out, let's make it nice and big. Now what I'm going to do is I'll bring it down a little bit. I'm going to do this. Now because I already set my white balance, the temperature shouldn't be off much, so it isn't. But I'm just going to make sure it's absolutely perfect, or nothing wrong with calibrating it a bit more. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to get rid of this. We're going to get rid of the mask. If we press Control D, you see that we did fix the white balance just a little bit. Control D to disable or toggle the node itself on and off. So I'm going to rename this node to something like WB1, just white balance 1. And now we're going to go back to the timeline and click on our second marker, and you can snap to the markers by pressing the toggling or untoggling snapping up here, or N is the hotkey. I'm going to go back to my color tab and press Alt S to create a new node. I'm going to name this one Contrast. Now I'm not saying this is absolutely like what you should go by here, but this is what I found worked for me. So these color swatches, I'm just making an assumption. I don't really know exactly what the IRE level is, but what I'm going to do is I've decided I'm going to create a new mask. So I've decided I like these. I don't like that one right there. I think it's a bit too bright. I think this one might be 90% IRE. I'm just going to assume it is. Now I'm not going to get this one because this one reflects. It's very matte. It's good for a studio environment, not a outdoor environment. And what I like to do when I create my LUT is I'm going to go ahead and mask all that. I'm going to bring out the waveform so you can clearly see it. And I'm just going to use offset and gain. That's it. So I want from 30 IRE to around 90. So we're going to say about something like this. And I'm just guessing. I'm not an expert with this. I'm just going to go ahead and get it to about right here. Now you need to do something like this. You need to have your LUTs have a uniform sort of exposure. And by doing this, whatever you decide on what numbers to go with, you need to have a uniform exposure for your LUTs, or else this little trick won't work very well. This little trick of trying to avoid bringing out the color checker, it just won't be as consistent. So I found that for me, around 300 or so to around about a little bit over 900, maybe bring the gain down a little bit, that works well for me. So now what I'm going to do is get rid of that. So now let's go ahead and press Control D. You see I did sort of get the contrast more in line. Press Alt S. We're going to add a new node. And I'm going to name this one, we're going to call this WB Simple. And it is quite simple. I'm just doing a quick check on my white balance. I'm just going to choose one of these. And now we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to go to the vector scope. You can see the white balance is looking good. And now I'm going to press Alt S, or again right click, add serial node. I'm going to clean up the node graph. And if I go down here, you can see when I name this one CC Simple. So over here we're going to make a new mask, and again ideally you want this to be, these swatches up front, up at the top, to be in focus, but you can still make it work without them being in focus, so it's not a big deal. But if you want to be a bit more exact, you do want them to be in focus. Okay, so these bottom ones represent skin tones, and then the top ones represent something like 50% hue for various colors. So what we're going to do is I've found that, I believe, what is it, something like 65 saturation gets a good start. And then what I'm going to do is go into my hue versus hue and hue versus sat controls to then actually create the LUT. So this is where, or not create the LUT, but what we're going to do is we're going to calibrate. I go to my vector scope. We're trying to actually calibrate the colors here so they fall in line the way they're supposed to fall in line. So let's go for it. Bring that down. Bring this up. Something like this. And we started with a saturation of 65 here on this node, so let's right click that, make a new one, start over, make sure it's done right. Now we're going to go back to hue versus hue and adjust magenta, and then adjust blue, adjust cyan, adjust green. I'm going to reset that, I don't like that. Adjust green, and then maybe blue. We can maybe make blue a little bit more appropriate. You don't have to be perfect, but you want to spend a few moments making sure that things fall in line pretty well. And you can see if I add the skin tone indicator, you can see the skin tones go on that line quite well. If I press Control D, or if I do this actually, let's go ahead and let's make this a bit smaller. Let's disable the mask. If I press Control D, you can see this is how the colors looked originally out of the GH5. And now you can see the colors are more corrected. So what you would do is the next step of the procedure, you want to actually save this LUT. But what I found was I don't like changing the exposure of clips I apply the LUT to. I like to change the exposure after. So I actually do something that might seem counterintuitive. Now that we got the colors right, we know that in a Rec 709 color space, if you were to increase the contrast, you're going to pretty much increase the saturation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable the contrast, go to CC Simple, bring my saturation back down to 50, and now bring up my clips, right click the clip. So what I'm doing is I'm disabling any saturation adjustments. I'm also disabling the contrast. Now I'm going to right click, generate a 3D LUT. I'm going with a 65 point cube. The file is a little bit bigger, but it's more precise. So I'm going to go with the 65 point cube. And now I would simply save it as a LUT. So I'm just going to save it as, I'm going to call this a test folder. So I'm going to say this as GH5 cloudy day cool, and I'm going to say windshield, for example, and just 01. That's just an example. Now, as long as I shoot in that particular white balance with Vlog on the GH5 that I set, the white balance that I set to one of my custom white balances, I can then apply this LUT, and I should get some pretty good colors out of camera under similar lighting conditions. So let's save the LUT. So the LUT's been saved. What I'm going to do is go to exported LUTs, and we're going to go to test, and I'm going to go to file, project settings, we're going to go to color management, open LUT folder. We're going to just make a new folder called custom test, and then in here I'm going to take the LUT that I made and paste it in here, and now I'm going to update lists, and I'm going to save it. I'm going to go back to my timelines here, and to keep things simple I'm just going to use the same timeline. And now I'm going to grab some footage that I shot a day later under similar lighting conditions. I did not use the color checker. I simply shot the footage using the appropriate white balance. So let's go to a scene that would be similar. You can see this scene right here. So when you look at it, you see that I'm driving, and if I go to the color page, let's look at it on the color page. Shift Z there to make it go, so you can see how it looks. It's an interesting shot. That's in Vlog on the GH5. What we're going to do is I'm going to press Alt S and make a new node. I'm going to go to my LUTs folder. I'm going to go to custom test, and we're double click, and we applied it to the footage. So we've baked in our log curve, so we brought that over. Now it's looking a lot more like CinelikeD, but we don't have our saturation. So let's go ahead and press Alt S to make a new node. Let's go to saturation, and I like to name my nodes, my LUTs, so they have the saturation value I like. So I'm going to say 65, but of course you can, if you wish, set any sort of value to your saturation. That's why I didn't want to bake it in. I also didn't want to bake in contrast because I didn't want to change the overall exposure. And now we're going to go to our previous node. So this node is what we would call the LUT, and then this node might be sat, and then this node might be something like white balance. So we're going to actually affect our white balance prior to converting it on over to something more like CineLike. We are actually affecting our white balance prior to the LUT in Vlog space. So let's get rid of this. Let's go ahead and make sure we turn off highlight, and let's disable this. So now you can see I'm going to change my temperature. Maybe something like that, just a subtle change. And now I may also add a new node, and I may call this one like maybe exposure, EXP, just kind of a general order. And now I'm going to go ahead and affect things like lift, maybe some gain, and you can see when we press play, okay, I don't like the color there, but I can simply go back to white balance and affect it. Maybe I like that. And as you can see now, you can see that the colors look really good. This is Vlog shot out of camera, and this is the corrected Vlog. You have the dynamic range of Vlog, but it looks more similar to something like CinelikeD, and the colors look very good. You can control the contrast as you please. I can bring up my clips. Let's go ahead and apply the grade. Let's go look at this shot here, and let's go and bypass the effects. Let's go and apply the grade here. So right click, apply grade, and you can see if I press Shift Z, you can see the colors look quite pleasing. And keep in mind, I'm actually filming through a windshield. So I've corrected with my LUT, I've corrected for the color shift that the Tiffin variable ND filter creates on, well, any lens it's on. I've corrected for color shifts from that. I've corrected for the color shift of the windshield itself, and I've corrected for the various color, the different color science of the camera itself. So each camera has its own color science, so I've corrected for that as well by using color checker. So by using this method, you can get drones, GoPros, by using native white balance on the GoPros preferably, GoPros, drones, bigger cameras, DSLRs, whatever you're using, to match quite well as a good starting point by using the LUT. So here's the LUT without the LUT, and then here's the LUT. So I did bake in my curve as well as the actual color changes themselves. Now, what you're going to see is if I look at this shot, which I thought this shot was also quite, I think it's this shot, no it's not. This is the shot that I liked. So I like the mountain there. And I'm driving on Interstate 5 in California on Thanksgiving morning here. And I've got tire chains on. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring up my LUT folder. So I named it, if I go to Custom Panasonic, let's press Alt-S to add a new node. We're going to call this LUT, L-U-T. And now I'm going to go to the GH5 LUTs that I've made. And I'm going to, let's see, cloudy day, warm. I believe that's it. And now I'm going to add an, let's see, the first step is I'm going to go and change the white balance while I'm in vlog space. So I'm going to go over here and change my color temperature a little bit. I think that might be a bit more appropriate. And then I'm going to add a new node, Alt-S, and call this one Sat. And I'm going to bring up the saturation to something like 65. And maybe I need to change my white balance again. It's not a big deal. I can always maybe do my saturation first and then white balance later. It's not a big deal. And now I'm going to add a new node. I'm going to just call this EXP. And now I'm going to control my lift and my gain. And then just because I want to, I'm going to add a new node, Alt-S. And because I have my sharpening down in camera, I'm going to add a bit of sharpening here. Let's go to something like that. And now if I press Shift F and then Shift C, you can see if I zoom in here and press Control D, that's no sharpening, sharpening. No sharpening, sharpening. So let's press Shift Z again to go full screen. If you look at the footage itself, it looks quite good, quite professional. Looks like the shot was taken on a much more expensive camera, but I'm simply using Vlog on a GH5, matching it to CinelikeD, and then I am taking that footage, color calibrating, so removing the unique color science of the camera and standardizing it to where it matches reality much better. And then this would be considered a very good starting point. You can always add a creative grade to this, but this is a very good starting point. So by creating LUTs, you can simplify your grading process by having a good starting point within seconds. And in this case, I feel that if I want to change exposure, I believe for me, I think it's better to do it in log space. So I'm going to the white balance node. I'm changing my offset, which will actually get affected by the curve which comes next, which is actually baked into the LUT. So anyways, that's how that works. So let's go ahead and look at this again. This is another shot. Let's see how that looks. The colors look very natural. And then if I go over here and apply this grade, so apply grade, you can see yet again maybe my exposure is a bit off. There's no exact correct way to do it. I just found that this method works for me, and as always, I'm constantly learning, and so I hope this was helpful. And again, I know I went kind of quick, but I assume that you have some knowledge with Davinci Resolve, and I hope this helped. So that's it.